Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. On last week's FOMO Friday report, we got into what President Trump is doing with USAID. And we didn't really have a lot of time to cover it all. And I wanted to get into it a little bit deeper because I think this is something that we elected President Trump to do. The USAID is a governmental agency that has completely gone rogue, and it's wasting taxpayer money. In fact, let's dig into that a little bit deeper here. The employees, and this is from a Daily Wire report. It says employees at the U.S. Agency for International Development. So that's the USAID stands for. Employees at the U.S. Agency for International Development are lashing out over the Trump administration's decision to gut the agency over waste and completely uncooperative staffers. That's what they're being called. Now, reports indicate that USAID, which had an annual budget of, get this, about $40 billion with a B dollars and 13,000 staffers, will be slashed down to 290 employees. Now, the move comes after the Department of Governmental Efficiency, also, of course, known as DOGE, they revealed shocking waste at the agency, including millions for LGBT activism in Guatemala and DEI advancement in Serbia. Now, one USAID staffer speaking to NPR complained about the massive cuts by saying, "There is no bottom to this stupidity," the employee is what the employee said. A USAID official echoed the same, telling the outlet, "Might as well just shut the whole thing down. 290 people won't be able to do anything." Okay. One employee recalled a virtual meeting that took place on Monday when staffers, this is a little bit humorous. I mean, people are losing their jobs. So, hey, I'm not unsensitive or, to that, but it's a little bit interesting, particularly when you put it in context of their attitude here. But anyway, one employee recalled a virtual meeting that took place on Monday when staffers were leaving the meeting as they were receiving emails about their access being shut off. They said it was like a horror film. So anyway, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this past week that initially the goal was to reform USAID because, again, USAID, not everything they were doing was bad. Okay. I have a friend who has some connections to Uganda, and they were getting water from USAID, and a lot of it was bottled water, some different things like that. And because of the halt to the USAID funds, there were people that were having to stand in line at the water well for hours now because of the fact that we are not buying their water anymore. So I understand how it can affect people, but is that really supposed to be our job to do as taxpayers of the United States? And the goal was to reform USAID, is what Rubio said. However, when they were met with resistance from the agency, they were forced to take a drastic action. He said, "They have basically evolved into an agency that believes that they're not even a U.S. government agency," Rubio told Fox News. He said that they are a global charity, that they take the taxpayer money and they spend it as a global charity, irrespective of if it's in the national interest or not of the national interest. He also said they're completely uncooperative. He said, "So we had no choice but to take dramatic steps to bring this thing under control." Now, the U.S. Agency for International Development Lettering outside the USAID headquarters in Washington, D.C. was removed on Friday, so that's already taken action. That was the same day a federal judge paused the Trump administration's action to lay off 2,200 of the USAID workers, scheduling a hearing on the matter for February 12th. Now, here is a list. I'm going to go over some of the list here of some of the things that they have already uncovered as far as what USAID was paying for. So these are what you and I, our taxpayer dollars, have been paying for. Okay, here's $7.9 million to teach Sri Lankan journalists how to avoid binary gendered language, unquote. That's almost $8 million there. $20 million for a new Sesame Street show in Iraq. 4.5, actually over 4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. 1.5 million for art for inclusion of people with disabilities. 2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism, as they put it, in Guatemala. $6 million to transform digital spaces to reflect feminist democratic principles, as they put it. 2.1 million to help the BBC, that's over, of course, in England, right? Value the diversity of Libyan society. $10 million worth of USAID funded meals, which went to Al-Qaeda linked terror group. 25 million for the elect to promote, quote, green transportation, unquote, in the country of Georgia. That's up by Russia. 2.5 million to promote inclusion in Vietnam. 16.8 million to a separate inclusion group in Vietnam. 5 million to Eco Health Alliance. That's one of the key NGOs funding bat virus research at the Wuhan Institute there in China. 20 million for a group related to a key player in Russiagate impeachment hoax. They got 20 million for that. 1.1 million to an Armenian LGBT group. They're very Muslim there, and so I don't know how that one went over, but anyway, it would have been interesting to find out. $1.2 million to help the African Methodist Episcopal Church Service and Development Agency in Washington, D.C. build a state-of-the-art 440-seat auditorium. $1.5 million to promote LGBT advocacy in Jamaica. $2 million to promote LGBT equality through entrepreneurship in Latin America. $500,000 to solve sectarian violence in Israel. Yeah, that was just 10 days before the Hamas attacked them on October 7th. $2.3 million for artisanal and small-scale gold mining in the Amazon. $3.9 million for LGBT causes in the Western Balkans. $5.5 million for LGBT activism in Uganda. $6 million for advancing LGBT issues in priority countries around the world. So that could just go anywhere, right? $6.3 million for men who have sex with men in South Africa. And $8.3 million for USAID education, equity, and inclusion. So that's just a small, it's not a complete list, okay? There's more and more and more coming out all the time. That's just a partial list of what you have been funding and what I have been funding with our taxpayer dollars. I liked, I saw an opinion piece by Matt Walsh, and I really thought that it summed things up very well. And this is what he had to say, and I'm going to include a couple clips here as well. But he said that as Twitter began to gain popularity around 15 years ago, millions of people in Cuba were looking for a similar website that they could use to send short messages to the world. It was difficult to access Twitter itself because Cuba's communist government restricted internet access. So there was a big untapped market there. Fortunately for Cubans, an alternative quickly emerged. It was called Zunzio, which is a Cuban expression that's supposed to sound like the noise a hummingbird makes. So we had Twitter, and they had a knockoff called Zunzino. Zuino, I guess. I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. But even though it was a pretty cheap knockoff, however, the application quickly became popular, gaining tens of thousands of users in a matter of months. The creators of the app had obtained a list of 500,000 Cuban cell phone numbers from somewhere, and presumably the black market. So they were able to pitch the program directly to users. The cell phones were the key to the whole business model. See, Zunzunio was able to evade Cuba's internet restrictions because it relied entirely on text messaging and cell services. And after just a couple of years in service, though, Zunzino abruptly disappeared. It just went offline without any warning whatsoever. No one had any idea what happened to it. It wasn't until several years later that we learned the truth because of an investigation that was published by the Associated Press. And it turns out that Zunzino was secretly created by the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. Yes, the U.S. government's International Development Agency had created a social media app in Cuba without telling anyone in this country or in Cuba. And in response to this reporting, the White House spokesman claimed that it was all just a big understanding. Here, listen to what he had to say.
The U.S. has admitted to being behind a Twitter-style text messaging service in Cuba, but denies it was a covert operation to topple President Castro. The Associated Press news agency revealed that the U.S. aid agency funded Zunzuneo, claiming it aimed to stir unrest, something the White House refuted.
Congress funds democracy programming for Cuba to help empower Cubans to access more information and to strengthen civil society. These appropriations are public, unlike covert action. The money invested has been debated in Congress.
Okay. So the White House spokesman, Jay Carney, claimed that everything is above board. After all, USAID is all about helping other countries, and we're just helping Cuba out. What's the problem here, right? Well, as it turns out, even if you assume that the U.S. should be helping out foreign countries by sending them taxpayer money, which we obviously shouldn't be doing, there are still major problems here. Here's a big one right here. According to the Associated Press, the estimated $1.6 million spent on Zunzuneo was publicly earmarked for an unspecified project in Pakistan. But those documents don't reveal where the funds were actually spent. In other words, this was fraud. Congress authorized the money to go to Pakistan. The president signed an appropriations bill spending the money to Pakistan. And the money did not go to Pakistan. Instead, it went to Cuba. American voters were told that the money was going to one place and it went to another. And there's a very clear reason why USAID might have been interested in lying about where the money was going, which is this. The point of spending the money was not to develop Cuba. The point was to overthrow Cuba's government. This is what the Associated Press said. It said USAID and its contractors went to extensive lengths to conceal Washington's ties to the project, according to interviews and documents obtained by the AP. They set up front companies in Spain and the Cayman Islands to hide the money trail and recruited CEOs without telling them that they were working for the U.S. taxpayer-funded project. Eventually, they hoped the network would reach critical mass so that the dissidents could organize small mobs, mass gatherings called called at a moment's notice that could trigger political demonstrations or renegotiate the balance of power between the state and society. Reading that, you can't help but think about all of the small mobs that the government has probably worked to organize in this country. This is clearly what our intelligence agencies are good at. They launder money with the goal of overthrowing governments with color revolutions all the time. Whether it's in Ukraine or Cuba, but you're supposed to think they'd never do that same thing here. They'd never say, I don't know, stoke racial tension so that half the country is lit on fire in the name of racial equity. In this particular case, though, the U.S. government got caught. And that led to some embarrassments among Democrats, let's say. For example, one prominent Democrat, Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont, asked USAID, "What in heaven's name are you thinking? If you're going to do a covert operation like this for a regime change, assuming it ever makes any sense, it's not something that should have been done through USAID." So he gave them a finger wagging, and then nothing happened. USAID suffered no consequences whatsoever. He says, I bring all this up because it's one of many egregious examples of how USAID has been operating with total impunity over the past several decades. This is an agency that JFK created by exclusive order during the Cold War and helped fight the spread of communism. And then Congress formally established USAID with a law called the Foreign Assistance Act. And ever since then, the agency has steadily grown and spent more and more taxpayer money overseas. Like all government programs, it has simply consumed more and more resources over time, like cancer, with no sign of ever going away. There is no accountability for any of this spending. This is Enron level accounting, and we've seen we've been tolerating it for decades. Really, if Americans knew what was happening, they'd overwhelmingly oppose it all. And as of September of last year, USAID has already spent most of the $39 billion it's been allocated for Ukraine. Supposedly, this is not military assistance because, after all, USAID is about international development. By contrast, the Defense Department has been allocated something like $124 billion for Ukraine, and they spent around $49 billion of it. In other words, if you thought that Pentagon spending accounted for the vast majority of the spending in Ukraine, you'd be wrong. As it turns out, USAID is doing a lot of work in Ukraine. And the truth is that we have no idea what they're doing there. Supposedly, the money is going to an economic support fund to pay the pensions and salaries of Ukrainian government bureaucrats. That's the stated reason, which is bad enough. But almost certainly, they're also laundering a lot of money to promote propaganda for the war effort there. The level of fraud is hard to comprehend. Just imagine auditing a $39 billion economic support fund for Ukraine. But there are no line items, so you can only imagine it. Again, this has been going on for a very long time. And as far back as 2017, Congressman Francis Rooney pointed out that USAID was subsidizing the World Economic Forum for no apparent reason. Here's what he said.
And there are so many abuses of AID. I found out that AID has given money to support the World Economic Forum. Why would the United States taxpayer be subsidizing the World Economic Forum when everybody that arrives over there arrives in a Gulfstream G5?
Yeah, yes, we're paying globalist billionaires with our tax money. You never voted for that. Congress never authorized it, but it happened. And no one ever put an end to the slush fund. So it just grew bigger and bigger. And the other day, the White House press secretary outlined a small percentage of some of the USAID money that is going today. Here's what she said.
Through USAID over the past several years, these are some of the insane priorities that organization has been spending money on. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. I don't know about you, but as an American taxpayer, I don't want my dollars going towards this crap, and I know the American people don't either, and that's exactly what Elon Musk has been tasked by President Trump to do, to get the fraud, waste, and abuse out of our federal government. Thank you,
You like the little music in there too. Anyway, as bad as all of those line items sound, and they obviously sound really bad, and are really bad, the truth is, it's probably much worse than that. It's the federal government saying they're spending our money to make gay comics in Peru. It's the federal government saying they dropped $70,000 to promote DEI in Irish theaters. That's what they're claiming. And as we've established, they have no problem lying about all of this at all. So the chances are pretty high that in reality, all of this money actually went to coup attempts that you know nothing about and that you will never know anything about. And in a previous era, this would be called a constitutional crisis, a federal agency just simply gone rogue. They are spending money that Congress and the voters have not authorized them to spend. And on top of that, none of this is a good idea anyway, since we're the only country on the planet that routinely dishes out huge amounts of money like this to foreign governments. We should not be giving a single penny of American tax dollars to any foreign government anywhere. But we're doing a lot more than that. So now, finally, the Trump administration is putting an end to it. The USAID website was just taken offline. USAID workers were allowed in the building for just a temporary time, and Trump and Elon Musk have agreed that the agency should be shut down. And in response, of course, Democrats are panicking over this in a way that they haven't panicked over anything else Trump has done. They're extremely animated over the collapse of an agency that funnels money overseas without accounting for any of its spending. It's almost as if they benefited in some way from this spending. Here, for example, is Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who claims that this moment is the official beginning of Trump's dictatorship. Yes, we're currently living in the first dictatorship in history that began with a popular vote victory. and that will end 4 years later at the conclusion of the term, as prescribed in the Constitution. Yeah, here's what she had to say.
It is really, really a sad day in America. We are witnessing a constitutional crisis. We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like. When you gut the Constitution and you install yourself as the sole power, that is how dictators are made. What Trump and Elon and all of their cronies are trying to do is take away the constitutional power of Congress. We get to decide. We have the power of the purse.
So if you can get past all of the hysteria, the point she's trying to make is that USAID was established by Congress, and therefore only Congress can get rid of USAID. Until that happens, if the president doesn't want to spend billions of taxpayer dollars overseas, then he's a dictator. That's what she's saying. On the contrary, this is, of course, the exact opposite of a dictatorship. Trump ran on certain promises and is now delivering to the voters precisely what they asked for. One of those promises from the very beginning has been to cut waste and to root out corruption and drain the swamp. It's pretty clear that Trump is doing all three of these things through the assault on USAID. Trump, as the executive, doesn't have to waste our money, even if Congress has authorized him to do so. Even Democrats agree with this, by the way. You might remember that Democrats once argued that Barack Obama didn't have to enforce immigration law, even though it was passed by Congress. To the extent anyone was acting like a dictator in this scenario, it was the unelected bureaucrats at USAID. No one voted for them. No one even knows their names. They regularly lied about where your money was going. They spent money without constitutional authorization in order to overthrow foreign governments, which is criminal for about 5 different reasons. But even Democrats have admitted that. None of that sounds particularly democratic, and yet no one in the Democratic Party ever objected to it. The reason Democrats are freaking out is pretty obvious. Trump is tearing their money laundering operation to pieces. Their slush fund is being just decimated. You might remember that Ilhan Omar previously stated, according to a translation of her remarks that was actually obtained by the Daily Wire, by the way, that as long as she's in office, Somalia will never be in danger. She also said she'd work day and night to preserve the interests of Somalis in the United States. And part of that work, we can assume, means ensuring that billions of dollars in U.S. aid continues flowing to Somalia, so that Somalia can squander all of it, as it has always done, and the country can continue to be a hellhole, which it has always been and always will be. This is the kind of corrupt arrangement that USAID has established for many politicians in many different contexts, and would certainly explain why, seemingly out of nowhere, Democrats are taking to the streets in defense of USAID. They had a whole parade of speakers outside the agency headquarters just the other day. And here is what Congressman Jamie Raskin told them.
Elon Musk, you didn't create USAID. The United States Congress did for the American people. And just like Elon Musk did not create USAID, he doesn't have the power to destroy it. And who's going to stop him? We are. We're going to stop him. And just like the president who is elected to something cannot impound the money of the people, we don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk. And that's going to become real clear.
Yeah, he begins by saying Elon didn't create USAID, as if that's a damning point in some way. We're supposed to be outraged that Elon Musk did not create a massive and unaccountable government bureaucracy that lights money on fire. Congress did that. Thank you for establishing that, Jamie Raskin. Then things descended into parody when he talks about Elon Musk and Donald Trump impounding taxpayer money as if they're stealing it. No, they're saving taxpayer money from being wasted on foreign countries. They're not stealing it, they're preserving it. They're keeping it within the United States. That's what voters overwhelmingly want. And any Democrat who claims this is somehow unconstitutional needs to explain why they allowed USAID to unconstitutionally steal our money for the better part of a century. Democrats know they have no explanation for this, which is why they're in full panic mode right now, as they attempt to convince Americans that USAID, an entity that most Americans didn't even know existed until like 24 hours ago, is somehow vital to their daily lives. Here's the Democrats, and here's the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Okay, listen to his concerns about what might be coming next.
Also know this is just the beginning. If DOGE attacks USAID today, then you can be sure they'll move on to another target tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe it'll be the Postal Service or the IRS or even the Social Security Administration. They could be next. Or maybe our national security agencies.
You see, as far as I can tell, Chuck Schumer meant for this soundbite to seem menacing. He meant for Americans to tremble in the fear at the possibility of the IRS might cease to exist. One day, Schumer warned, you might be able to go about your life without worrying about whether the IRS will suspend all your constitutional rights under the guise of an audit in the attempt to squeeze just a little more money out of you so that the federal government can waste it on gay plays in Peru. Can you even comprehend the horror? There will be legal challenges to the closure of USAID. They've already started. And Democrats will continue to lie about the organization and what it does. And they will do everything they can to make you afraid of something that that should have happened a long time ago. And that's because they're the ones who are terrified. They're not even doing a very good job of hiding it. They understand that, finally, they're going to have to account for the taxpayer money, your money, that they've been spending. And the more Democrats melt down, and the more it becomes apparent that they have no way of doing that. Doge has gone from a meme to an existential threat to enriched government corruption. And now, much more rapidly than we thought possible, the corruption is finally being exposed and humiliated and thoroughly destroyed. I could not have put it better myself, and I think that, these are good things. This is what we elected Trump to do. It's what we elected him to do the first time, and he kind of didn't do it. And now it's happening, and man, is it happening fast. I would love to hear from you on this. And of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. And again, we are on YouTube now. You can hear us there. And I would love for you to subscribe and like as well. Thank you very much for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.